And hey, I'm so glad to see everyone. So if you haven't been to this meeting, we start out by reading this essay, which is kind of a long reading, but it's the only reading we have. So I'll go ahead and kick it off. Love, the Next Frontier, written January of 1958. I think that many oldsters who have put our AA booze cure to a severe but successful test still find they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of a much more real maturity and balance, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. Those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance. Urges quite appropriate to age 17 proved to be an impossible way of life when we are at age 47 or 57. Since AA began, I have taken immense wallops in all of these areas because of my failure to grow up emotionally and spiritually. My God, how painful it is to keep demanding the impossible, and how very painful to discover finally that all along we have had the cart before the horse. Then comes the final agony of seeing how awfully wrong we have been, but still finding ourselves unable to get off the emotional merry-go-round. How to translate a right mental conviction into a right emotional result and so into happy and good living. Well, that's not only the neurotic's problem, it's a problem of life itself for all of us who have got to the point of real willingness to hew to right principles in all our affairs. Even then, as we hew away, peace and joy may still elude us. That's the place so many of us AA ultras have come to, and it's a hell of a spot, literally. How shall our unconscious, from which so many of our fears, compulsions, and phony aspirations still stream, be brought into line with what we actually believe, know, and want? How to convince our dumb, raging, and hidden Mr. Hyde becomes our main task. I have recently come to believe that this can be achieved. I believe so because I begin to see many benighted ones, folks like you and me, commencing to get results. Last autumn, depression, having no real rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners. I began to be scared that I was in for another long chronic spell. Considering the grief I've had with depression, it wasn't a bright prospect. I kept asking myself, why can't the 12 steps work to release my depression? By the hour, I stared at the prayer of St. Francis. It is better to comfort than to be comforted. Here was the formula, all right, but why didn't it work? Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them, and when defeat came, so did my depression. There wasn't a chance of making the outgoing love of St. Francis a workable and joyous way of life until these fatal, almost absolute dependencies were cut away. Because I had over the years undergone a little spiritual development, the absolute quality of these frightful dependencies had never before been so starkly revealed. Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I find I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, and indeed upon any set of circumstances whatsoever. Then only could I be free to love as Francis had. Emotional and instinctual satisfactions I saw were really the extra dividends of having love, offering love, and expressing love appropriate to each relation to life. Plainly, I could not avail myself of God's love until I was able to offer it back to him by loving others as he would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependency meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of people and conditions surrounding me. While those words absolute dependency may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others regardless of their return to me. This seems to be the primary healing circuit, an outgoing love of God's creation and his people by means of which we avail ourselves of his love for us. It is most clear that the real current can't flow until our paralyzing dependencies are broken and broken to death. Only then can we possibly have a glimmer of what adult love really is. Spiritual calculus, you say? Not a bit of it. Watch any AAs of 6 months working with a new 12-step case. If the case says to the devil with you, the 12-stepper only smiles and turns to another case. He doesn't feel frustrated or rejected. If his next case responds and in turn starts to give love and attention to other alcoholics, yet gives them back to him, the sponsor is happy about it anyway. He still doesn't feel rejected. Instead, he rejoices that his one-time prospect is sober and happy. And if his next following case turns out in later time to be his best friend or romance, then the sponsor is most joyful. but he well knows his happiness is the byproduct, the extra dividend of giving without any demand for return. The really stabilizing thing for him was having and offering love to that strange drunk on his doorstep. That was Francis at work, powerful and practical, minus dependency and minus demand. In the first 6 months of my own sobriety, I worked hard with many alcoholics. Not a one responded, yet this work kept me sober. It wasn't a question of these alcoholics giving me anything. My stability came out of trying to give, not out of demanding that I receive. Thus, I think it can work out with emotional sobriety. If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to 12-step ourselves and others into emotional sobriety. Of course, I haven't offered any real new idea, only a gimmick that started to unhook several of my own hexes at depth. Nowadays, my brain no longer races compulsively in either elation, grandiosity, or depression. I've been given a quiet place in the bright sunshine. And tonight, we have the wonderful Judy L. from Colorado, who is super awesome and agreed to speak with us tonight. So kind of here's how we go. If you haven't done this before, this is how we do it. Or if you haven't been on here before, I know you haven't done it before, but if you haven't been on here before, you just kick it off with whatever you want. Whatever that brings up for you, go for it. And if you really don't like it and it's not your bag, just talk about whatever you feel like for however long you feel like it. And, then we'll open it up. So without further ado, Judy, thank you for coming on. You can unmute yourself now. There you go.
There I am. Sam, thank you for that very inventive, flowery, wonderful introduction. Good grief. Now I got to try and live up to it, right? That's the hard part. So I'm Judy, and I'm from I'm an alcoholic, and I'm from Colorado. I'm obviously a little nervous. Some of my heroes are on this call.
Hi, Judy.
That I never know whether it's easier to talk before strangers or friends, frankly. So this time, some of my folks are on here, and I'm thrilled to be with you. So thank you so much for the kind privilege of being here. It is a privilege. I think anytime we're allowed in to this great fellowship at any level of service around the 3 legacies of this program, I think it's a privilege. And with that comes a great responsibility and some commitment as well. So thanks for all the hands that make it work. My sobriety date is August 17th, 1982. And I say that always a little hesitantly because I was 7 years sober before I began to actually get the gift of understanding sobriety, because finally at about 7 years, when I was in great sober despair, I'm making this short, but I was an active non-drinking ism walking around for a really long time. And part of that ism had to do with this reading that you just gave. So let me start though a little bit, especially if someone's kind of new. What are we talking about with an emotional sobriety? I'll get to that in a minute, but I think when people come in, we're more like dry for sometimes quite a long while. All we've got is the booze has been hopefully lifted. The obsession might be lifted, maybe not. And what we're left with is kind of the yuck for a while. We got depression, and we've got self-centeredness, and we've got all kinds of character defects and guilt and remorse going on because we haven't yet worked through the steps. And we haven't yet found much more than the fellowship of one alcoholic greeting us at the door, or one alcoholic trying to make sense out of the program. But what really happens is that unless I have a first step, none of the rest of this is necessary. And I'm one of those people who was blessed with sobriety, but plagued with alcoholism. And because of that, I didn't hear a whole lot. My ears were plugged with self-importance, arrogance, delusion. And rather than even denial, I would say it was delusion. I lived in a lot of that, just this, what I thought made sense to me. I'm totally addicted to what Judy thinks. And I thought something different when I came into this program. It took a long while for me to get to a first step. And that first step actually happened when I was invited to go to a big book study, a workshop led by one of my heroes, a late hero now, who invited me when I was dissolving everywhere I went. Life had gotten too big for me, and my level of being alcoholic without drinking, I'd run out of all the juice that I had to bring to life. I'd given it my very best shot, sober, and I was sinking. And I got invited to do a big book workshop by some of the folks in the Denver area who really believed that you should show up at an inconvenience to yourself. And in this case, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, an hour away from my home. And about a dozen people gathered together, and we went through the steps. We didn't study the steps. We actually talked about them and did them. And we did this for about a year, sentence by sentence, sometimes word by word and share by share. And these were people who shared openly and honestly about where they were at. What I want to say is that at the end of this year or so, I came out a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've always wrestled a little bit about what exactly is a member, but I know that when I was done with this, I came out of this workshop a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I understood what I had. I understood what the solution was. I understood how I could be a member, how I could participate in the program, and I had a commitment to carry this message as it had been given to me. And because of that, I came out of that a changed person. But along the way, I'd had minor changes. I just not sufficient for those things to be a psychic change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. And I was losing it. So I want to tell you that I had a great second step experience, and I understand that first you have to understand what alcoholism is, and I have to understand if I am that person, and if I have that kind of mental obsession and that compulsion that only happens to an alcoholic. I don't have an obsession over drugs. I don't have an obsession over alcohol when I'm not drinking. Not so much anyway. I have an obsession for other things. And it's really easy to take that obsession and put it into other areas of my life without drinking. I don't know why I'm sober. It's not because I was blessed with being any better. I was defiant. I should by all rights have been a drunk. But I hung with you with the crazies in the club where I got sober. And I mean crazy. It was very exciting. It was the drama of the bar done without booze. And that's the way it was for us for a long period of time. Nobody asked me if I understood about alcoholism. I was never asked that question. Nobody offered to walk me through that I remember. Probably there were a lot of people, except that I was like, thank you, I'm cool, I'm good. Meanwhile, memorizing what you all said about the steps so that I could sound like you sounded. The problem is that I'd never taken the deep dive. The one place that I can find both recovery and the God of my understanding is a deeper dive inside myself, and I'd never taken that dive. It was all surface. And that's as far as my recovery was that deep. By the second step, and I'm only going to talk about those, there's 4 steps I want to talk about quickly. And the second step is that I have to open the door. Once I get how powerless I am, I have to open the door. And I came here convinced that I have to serve me. I'm not here to serve God. I spent most of my life serving Judy. Even in AA, I heard expressions that I believed, which were things like, God's working for me. You hear that at every meeting you go to around here anyway. God's working for me. And I thought, really? I don't have any God showing up to work for me. seems after some period of time has passed that I'm supposed to show up and offer my services to the God of my understanding. I'm here to serve you. That God has never once shown up on time to do my bidding. Not yet. Although when I pray, a whole lot gets done. But I know who's serving who. And it isn't me being served in the way that I thought. I thought if I pray, I have a friend that says if you pray on the blood of Jesus, your prayers always come true. It's like if I have a medallion, if I have a thing, exterior. What I know today is that nothing exterior is going to heal me. Nothing exterior to me is going to make my actions, my personality, my character different. And presumably somewhat better than it was when I got here. I was kind of a light for a long period of time. So by the time I get done with 4 or 5, I'm looking at 6 and 7, and I'm not passing those up because they're unimportant. But I think 6 and 7 lend themselves to language of the heart for me. And that's because I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at what was behind why I chose the things I chose. As I said, I'm addicted pretty strongly to me, and I couldn't believe why my life was constantly in a disaster and chaotic mode. And somewhere when we'd been doing that big book study, I was asked the question, what's your life like? Is there chaos in your life? And I was like, oh my God, of course there is. There's chaos in every alcoholic's life. You hear it at every meeting I was going to. That's what people were doing. They were talking about the chaos in their life. And here and there, somebody didn't have chaos. They had a whole different approach to their life that was from a place of trust, a place of solid relationship with the God of their understanding, not a belief. I heard so many people telling me about their belief in a higher power, but their lives were chaotic. So I want to just say for me, it wasn't about my belief in a higher power. It was about my relationship with that higher power that transcended my belief, that transcended my religious background, that transcended a lot of that. I had to find the place where I had a relationship that was sufficient enough for me to let go of some of my deeper, prideful, arrogant, goofy stuff in steps 6 and 7. And in order to do that, I had to build trust. And then as I did it, I needed more trust. And as I did more of that, I needed deeper faith. It's like, which of the chicken and the egg do you get here, right? Do I need God to be sober, or do I need sobriety to find God? It's a big question for me. I don't know the answer to it either. I'd like to know the answer. So how do I have a relationship with a higher power that will keep me from drinking and will keep me from the insanity of alcoholism? Because I was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, totally goofy, totally nuts, and not actually willing to have much in the way of my actions that looked like a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So at some point I found this essay. I want to tell you briefly, I'm acutely aware of time. I wanted to tell you briefly that when I found this, I thought I was the only one that knew about it. I had never heard it spoken about. I'd never heard anybody talking about going deeper. I'd never heard much about that kind of essay. And I found it. So I think it's a well-kept secret as far as I can tell. And I read this at the exact right moment. Have you ever noticed how it's probably one of those divine coincidences, but the actual answer appears when you're actually looking for an answer and not a minute before. So I'm desperate, feeling like I've done the work, but I hadn't reached the place with some of those issues around my life issues. I'm a person who comes from family background. I have family, I have commitments, I have a solid, good family background, actually, much better than I was able to live up to. And I see relationships as essential to me as a human being. They're what I am. I'm looking at this Hollywood Squares in front of me, and there's a whole lot of people that I have some relationship with, even at a distant level, and some that I have some history with. And it's really beautiful. But I didn't have those for a really long time. At one point, about this time, maybe later, I forget because time is pretty flexible for me. I was at war with most of the relationships in my life emotionally. And the big one was when the man I loved that I was married to and I were really at a place where, I've said this before, where I was Googling how long does it take to smother someone so that I could murder him without making my family feel bad like I divorced him, right? I didn't want that to happen. So I was willing to consider some alternatives. And it wasn't going to happen. When I learned how long you have to hold the pillow down, he would resist, and he's a big guy. So thank you, Glenn. So this essay came to me. I don't remember how, but it came to me. It's miracle work, right? And I began to look at my dependencies on everything outside of my house, myself. You guys perhaps knew all that, but I did not. Now, I relied on alcohol to provide me with looking thin, looking good, being excited about life, providing me with sufficient drama and partnership to make me look good, a job to make me look good, kids to make me look good. You get a theme here. I was spending a lot of my time dependent on exteriors, and my life was falling apart again, and I was really pretty sober. I was physically removed from alcohol. I had worked most of the steps, at least at some level. For a first time through, I now had trust and I had faith in the words that this book and this program gave me. And so I was, there's an interesting thing about this quote of St. Francis. And I heard it. I was raised Catholic, so I have some Catholic beliefs. I'm probably Catholic to my bones, even though I'm non-religious, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, I guess. But I'm familiar, I'm an Italian Catholic, so I know that St. Francis's feast day is this week, by the way. Thanks for asking me to speak on St. Francis's week. It's a big holiday in some places that I know. And St. Francis dropped everything. The prayer is nice. The prayers sometimes become rote, and I hear them, but I don't connect with them. The baggage of who I am includes my education. It includes my dependency on my image to myself, who I am, who my family was, who my ancestors were, how my children are, what church I go to, what clothes I wear. I got sober and started gaining weight. I'm no longer a thin, cute girl dancing to a lot of music. I've changed completely, not always happily, but it's the way it is. My dependencies, however, on image were pretty important. My dependencies on looking good, even to my kids. I wanted to look married, which is why I was Googling what I was. I wanted to be married. I wanted to look like a wife. I wanted to look like a success in Alcoholics Anonymous. And at some point, my dependencies had to change from even dependence on Alcoholics Anonymous, which was yet one more enlightened piece of the road to a dependence on God. I'm not saying all those things don't matter. Please don't misunderstand that. I am not saying they don't matter, but eventually I had to place my dependence bigger, on a place greater than a man-made program, a man-made religion, a man-made anything, even myself. And so if I look at it, talks about every disturbance we have. And I know a little bit about St. Francis. He was a guy with some noble background. He had pretty good background. He had good clothes. He looked good. He was supposed to do some other stuff. And he started giving it all away. Why? I don't know, he's much more spiritual than I would ever aim to be, but he started giving away everything. And when they asked him to appear in court, by the time he showed up, he had no clothes left. He believed that religion of the day was supposed to be taken the poor to the poor, those in prison, the poverty stricken. And we use him as our example. And a quick little plug here, because I like corrections. How many of us are willing to talk to the folks in and out of corrections in a way that allows us to take St. Francis's prayer into action? Or are we doing what sometimes came better from the Oxford movement, which was we prefer our members to be of the upper class, sober, smelling good, and looking pretty and sounding nice. And I just want to suggest that that's not where I came in, and that's not where a whole lot of us come in. And that maybe our service, if we're going to follow St. Francis, maybe it has more to do with my actions than my thoughts. Because I can think myself pretty holy, but my actions may not reflect that kind of stuff. So I want to just say that for me, this dependence became that I had to start a whole new look on all of my life. And in order to do that, I had gotten more sober enough that I could trust you, and sober enough that I could trust this growing sense of a power greater than myself. And I could begin a whole different journey. And so I think today that I've had several places in my life where my journey takes, a sudden 90-degree turn. It stayed in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was called to get bigger than the bubble in which my brain told me I was living in, the right now, the yesterday, as far as I got today. And that I was called to change and to grow and to give up some of those things. So if I wasn't going to kill my husband, if I wasn't going to disown my kids, if I wasn't going to leave AA, and I was one of those, I'm leaving AA. This is the last meeting I'm ever going to. I'm done with you folks. And then I'd have to show up and make coffee or something. And so I'd be brought back. Absolute dependence. Bill talks about maybe it looks like a gimmick, but I think it's perfect for me. That Bill has this awareness when he's about 20 years sober. He doesn't have it at 1 year. He doesn't have it at 5 years. He doesn't have it at 10 years. Because in New York, they were pursuing a little different kind of AA than they were in Akron. Akron had a strong religious bent where the Oxford movement was asking people to change their behaviors and to trust right from the very beginning. Bill was talking to New Yorkers, and they were talking about it from a point of view of, well, let's just get sober first. We'll deal with all that crazy sick stuff later, maybe. And so maybe came later, and the dime dropped for Bill. He's like, all of the depression is, anybody here ever had depression after you're really stone cold sober, after you've really worked the steps, after you've worked with people and been of service? I think that happens all the time. But we don't have a bigger solution because until we tell people, we're still hanging on to the next stage. We need to get out of the bubble and get into what's the next place of growth that my higher power would have me walk towards. So Bill at his 20 years says, wow, we were so busy getting people sober, we didn't have time to worry about how sick they were. Starting with myself. And I think that's absolute dependence for who I am based on outside influences is a powerful one that directed most of my life. And if you start peeling those away, as I started peeling them away, I began to see them when I was doing my steps 6 and 7. I saw them a little more clearer when I was doing 8 and 9, but I still didn't know what to do about them. The thoughts kept coming back. So this brings me back to my 6 and 7, which is one of my ongoing threads of my recovery, is based in steps 6 and 7. How deep can I go with the look at this broken instinct deep inside myself? that says, I can't trust X, Y, or Z, and I've got to go to Judy for the answer. I've got to go to serve me the answer, because there's some piece of that that thinks that I actually can be powerful over my sobriety. I actually can be powerful over my life now that I'm sober. And I think the ongoing problem with that is that many of us that are sober a long time actually get sicker in that belief than they do get open to the next level, the next frontier. And I think it's really easy to do that. And I think a lot of us get to that place where we've gone as we start getting bored with AA meetings. Maybe we've got too many sponsees to fit in our life. You know, maybe we need to back away a little bit or don't have so much to offer. And little by little, we start taking some emotional steps back. And maybe just the reverse of that. It may be that that's the time when we should take that gift of sobriety that we've been given, the unasked for, unearned, undeserved gift, and take it outside the bubble. And I guess I've said most of what I want to say. My dependencies have always been deep, and what they make me do is depend on me to influence you. Everything that I've done in AA, every hero, every person I have admired in AA has helped me go from that dependence to a dependence on a higher power that can function actively in my life, function in a way that is powerful, that will show up. And I don't know the answer to any of that stuff. I certainly don't know the answers to COVID or the next politics or the next religion or the next anything. But I know that I can't resolve the problems that are beyond Judy. I know that today I have to live my life, the life that you've shown me how to live, which is a life of integrity and a life of emotional balance through steps 10 and 11, but always getting rid of anything that gets between me and the God of my understanding. When I was much more newly sober and went to a fellowship of the Spirit, and I want to just acknowledge this, I heard Gary speak, and Gary said something about this guy who was trying to get sober and reading his cookbook in the kitchen. You probably remember that story, Gary, and you've told it a number of times. Now cut me a piece of cake. And that story had a real resonance with me then, because I was full at the time of my ability to understand the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I read fairly extensively. I also am a bit of a writer, and so I read a lot. I have books all over the house. Some of them inspirational, some of them trash you don't want to know about, but they're all in there. And I get it that I can read, just like I read before I got sober. I can read and think I'm going to have the answer, when in fact, I'm like the guy Gary was talking about. You could be starving to death in the kitchen with the cookbook in your hand if you never actually bake the cake. And that's kind of my experience, is that all of my thoughts, all of my mental thoughts about how I've really got this now, I'm really there because I can say it, has nothing to do with what's going on inside emotionally and spiritually and in my actions. And so I think a whole lot of us are starving to death in the kitchen with a cookbook. My dependency has to be on the one thing. That's the really new idea. The really old idea is the really new idea. I have to transfer that dependency. Maybe I will always have them, but I think that I'm a healthier dependency when the root of my life comes back into, I don't know, but maybe God does. So I know a lot less than I knew 10 years ago. I'm pretty comfortable. I'm pretty happy. And I'm basically just a person that lives in the sunshine that you bring into my life in many ways. You are often the only voice of God that I can hear. And as crazy as we are together, I do hear the voice of God, even when I go to our local prison, which I can't do right now. And I always hear the voice of God there. as insane as that is. So gotta have ears to listen. Put on my sponsor ears and listen to the voice of God. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was incredible, and I loved the reminder of the story of St. Francis and him giving away so much of that stuff, and a lot of it about the anonymity, kind of that deeper anonymity of just giving to people who are in need or who are poor or who I'm not going to get any recognition or dependence from. That's a really big piece of that whole thing. So kind of what we do is for the first few minutes, or the first couple shares, I'd like for you to kind of look on here and decide. You probably know a lot of people here. Just pick on a few people who you'd like to hear from, and then we'll open it up.
There's a whole lot of folks that I haven't heard from in a really long time.
Yeah, don't feel like you're going to hurt their feelings if you don't get one. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. I haven't heard from Jeff Gould in a long time. How about Jeff?
Love Jeff. Good pick.
Judy, thank you. You were wonderful, and I'm blessed to be here. And I had a deep resonance with so many things that you said. And I actually had I'm not a share about your day kind of guy, but it was a day worth sharing about. And it was bad fruit off a half-baked idea, you know. So I've had a outside issue, food, you know, whatever, and doing some steps around that on step 2. And I had this idea earlier in the week. I'm like, you know what? And I'm going to come around to emotional sobriety. I was like, I wonder if I could be like hypnotized, you know? And so I go online and find this guy, and like, if you could plant this seed deep in my subconscious. Yes, you want to eat leafy greens. No, you don't want to eat any more sugar. So I'm like, okay. So I silently make the appointment. I go in, and this guy's a clinician. He's doing his job. He said, tell me, you know, I'm giving him the history. He said, oh, okay, going back. So you're an alcoholic? Yeah. Well, tell me about your drink. What'd you drink? I drank a bottle of white tequila and salt every day for 10 years. And what else, Jeff? Yeah, I shot heroin, lived on the streets, you know, was arrested by the SWAT team in the laboratory and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, what do you think's driving that? Well, I had my hand cut off in a car accident. There's some dad stuff, some real heavy-handed dad stuff. We're getting into that. And then he got into, you know, so what brings you now, and talk about your history, because I had abstinence in this other fellowship for 10 years. And I said, well, one time when I really bottomed out, I bought me a case of those blackberry Dolly Madison fruit pies, and I ate all of them. It was like there was like a jellied handprint on the wall, like a CSI, like a crime scene. And my wife's like, dude, I'm worried about you. You got to get help, you know? And I did, but I told him that, and this guy is looking at me, and he asked me a lot more questions. I'm just answering the questions, you guys. And he looks at me with a stone cold face, and he says, ethically, I cannot treat you. He says, you're the worst one of you I've ever even met. And he says, and it's my belief you need to be in a treatment hospital today. And I was all, yeah. And so I sat, I was feeling really weird. And I told it, and then I was like, wait a minute, man. You think I'm the only recovered alcoholic here that ate a few too many pancakes during COVID? Come on, you know, like no. But I left it, and I guess what I realized, and this is what struck me on a deep level. There's a line that came from the book, so I didn't know what to make of that. There's a line in the book, I want to say it's in the family afterward, that says, sometimes you come across people that don't understand alcoholics. They just don't understand. Because if you understood what was wrong with me, you would know that it's 10 times graver than anything I told you in that interview. But if you understood the way I live, you would know that there's a benevolent, loving force that has wrapped itself so tightly around my life. And it puts things in my life and takes things away. And when my head gets too crowded and I turn to it, it clears my head of things and gives me new directions to take. How to live in that way. I made amends for 8 years, zip code by zip code, here and then the east side and then midtown and downtown. And I guess he never asked me what I actually did, because it's like, dude, if you followed me around for a week, you'd be like, yeah, you're kind of crushing it. You're actually doing pretty good for who you are. But we didn't get to that part. And I guess looking at my life through his eyes, this is such a peculiar miraculous way of living that we have access to, that like the normal person couldn't even wrap their head around it. Like he asked me, how are you sober? How are you sober? And I was like, well, anyway, and I'll close with this. There's a guy, Joel from Phoenix. He's on this, him and Tom, they were both part of this, so they'll both remember this.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Tom and Joel are in downtown Tucson. Everybody was in Tucson. We go to a Vietnamese restaurant, right? And it's just AA boys night out. And I saw this guy walk in, and he's like, you could tell it was a first date. He was super shy and awkward, and he's kind of shaking. He pulls the girl's chair out, and she sits down. He sits down. He's smiling. He's trying to make conversation. We're sitting 3 feet away. Joel starts talking about cocaine or some damn thing. Then Tom's talking about overdosing beneath a car, and like the oil, he's changing the oil. There's oil all over on his face, and he's going into some kind of, cardiac emergency or something. We're just kind of cutting up, laughing, doing what AAs do. And this guy on his first date, he's looking at us, and he goes white, and he's like, man, this is going really, really bad. Then our meal arrives, and Tom says, gentlemen, let's pray over this meal. We all hold hands, and then the guy's like, I gotta go, right? He tells the girl, can we go get seated somewhere else? And again, it's just seeing our lives through that other filter of like, we're just different. Like, and not only in the problem, but being in the solution is what makes us really different and unique. And here's the truth, guys. I don't need to go anywhere. As it turns out, on the top of page 85, I'm prone to absurd actions and ideas, like thinking I need hypnosis and go in and find out, like creating a bunch of confusion for myself. And it's like, all I really need was I needed a Thursday night at 7:30 to hear what Judy had to say, to connect to your heart, to let your heart connect to mine, and to finish my damn step 2 and not go to McDonald's tonight. That's what I needed to do, period. Sam, thanks for letting me share. It's good to be here. I love so many people in this group. Thank you.
Thank you, man. It sounds like that hypnosis is feeling a little dramatic. You know what I'm saying? Judy, who's next? Great share, Jeff. Love that. Judy, you get to pick a couple more squares. And you're muted.
Yep, always. Shelley,
Yeah.
How about you get to share for a minute? I haven't heard you in a long time.
Thank you. My name is Shelley. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Shelley.
I feel like I'm up in the mountain. There were so many more people that came after. I couldn't go up there anymore. And the last time I went up there, I ended up in the hospital. And I told the doctor, I said, I want to go home. She says, do you have any idea where you are? You're in ICU. But I had a great attitude, and thank you for helping out. You know, the meeting that you asked about, this Tuesday, the secretary decided that he would have Joe Hawk's CD playing, and then he would have Don P. And then he had Dan Sherman. And a sponsee of mine heard Joe Hawk say about going through the steps more than once. And you know, I never heard him say that. So, on a CD. But I've gone through the steps on a yearly basis, because by the time after my birthday, I've had enough of what I had. So I go through the steps and I have an experience. But this time was very interesting. I went through the steps. I made amends. I practiced 10-11, and I was furious. I was angry inside still. But I was trying to have some control over it. So this is a great story. I end up doing a little workshop with women in Baja, Mexico. And I take a third step with them. And I have 16 resentments. And I read it. And I get free. But the next day, I'm back in hell with it. So there were 2 events going on. And I decided to go to the event where Chris Schroeder was sharing on steps 6 and 7. As a matter of fact, he's here today. So he's talking about 6 and 7, and he's saying, I don't know exactly what he said, but he said how we play God. And I felt it in my gut. And this was something that I had created, which is in the big book, how I assign people roles. And I got free. On Yom Kippur night, the holiest night of the Jewish prayer circle, there is a beautiful song where you reach out to God. And I love that song because you say God's name in Hebrew with such zest, with everything you've got. And I said it. And what I did is I gave God everything. And I was in the living room screaming, like, you know, the Hebrew name for God. When I was done, I've been in another dimension. You know, I had great sponsorship. That man Joe had directions that were unbelievable. Gary Brown taught me about finishing amends. There were people that taught us about 10 and 11. Frank taught us about an attitude. We used to have retreats with him, and he taught us about an attitude. And all the people that Joe bought to have retreats with. Lynn showed me how to write inventory. She said, here's a little piece of paper. On a piece of paper, keep on scribbling. See what it really is. She says, you don't like parts of your body? Inventory them. I wanted to inventory my dog, and somebody says, you can't inventory your dog. I said, yes, you can. I said, my dog does not walk at the appropriate time for me to get to work on time. I want to see who I'm being selfish. And I wrote about my dog, and I love my dog. And I made amends if I was agitated with her. So my design for living that was given to me has worked. After Jaime passed away, it was no more joke about step 2. It had to become a reality because fear would crop up. So you'd ask God to remove my fear and resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. And I survived. So I'm grateful for my life. And I always pass on what was freely given to me with pleasure. And thank you for asking me to share. Thank you, Judy. One more thing, your trip to Italy the other year was fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Gary, would you say a few words?
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, that was great. I sure enjoyed listening to all that. You got to know the chocolate cake thing was Chuck Chamberlain's. It wasn't Gary Brown's. And I just borrowed it with that. I think I was remembering so many of the things you were talking about that have gone on there, and just trying to put it into my last couple of 3 days here. And that I get to questioning my emotional sobriety often. I've had a couple of reasons where I got extremely angry, and I real quick called Tom and tried to air it out and do all that. And there's times when I get to thinking that I'm so emotionally sober, that shit isn't going to happen to me anymore. And in case if you're going to make it as long as sober as I've been, it's going to, it probably is, and has. So I think I just love this meeting. I get to see friends all over the world. Hi, JP. But I am just real glad to be a part of this thing and get on as regular as I can, because I hear stuff that saves people lives, just like Jeff did and Judy did and that. So I hope you're listening if you're on this, because it's a wonderful thing. So you got to call on somebody else now, Judy.
Okay. Mary Thayer, would you speak to us?
Hi, Judy. It's great to see you. Great to hear you. Mary Thayer, alcoholic. I really, you were so articulate with how this process and how, I remember also when the first time I read that, I thought, where has this been? Where's this emotional what, and nobody was talking about it. And, periodically I would find it in my AA stuff and I would read it and, take a look at it and stuff. But like yourself, I think it's because I was taught that the 12 steps are like a clock. They go from 1 to 12, 1 to 12, 1 to 12. And so with the repetition of the steps, came to a different space when I was 20 years sober. And things started to change and get deeper. The big thing in the last 5 or 6 years is that self-delusion that I think is profound. Thank God I don't beat myself up with this stuff anymore. And, I can constructively, not destructively, take a look at the areas of my life that, I'm totally sure that I'm right and I'm completely wrong. And, I really don't know. And this summer I had something happen that I was absolutely living my life with this idea of this situation, and it was completely opposite. And when I saw it, I remember I just kind of stood back and I chuckled and I said, oh my God, I wanted to believe it this way. So I didn't want to look at the reality. I think as the spirit awakens, the idea of not knowing, as you said, is more profound to me, especially with this COVID, for crying out loud. I mean, it's like every plan I had this year didn't happen. So I don't use pen anymore. I only use pencil to put it in because it might change in 2 seconds. And I think the emotional sobriety comes with whether or not I'm flexible enough to change, whether I've got enough humility to say, I don't know. And whether or not I can admit my powerlessness and my unmanageability in certain areas of my life that before I was just kind of covering up. And so, I don't know, I missed everybody being up. I mean, I was going to be at FOTS, I was going to be at the International, everybody. But this Zoom has really started to reach beyond all of that and get to see you folks and get to hear you. And prayerfully one day we'll all be able to give each other a hug again. But God, you sounded great. God's working in your life and opening windows where we didn't think there was any windows and letting light in. And the job is deep down inside, and whether or not I can connect and not depend. Not that I don't depend on you or anybody, but I also realize for me today, I realize that once we have this common solution like we do, because most of us FOTS people are out of the book and so forth, but once we really know the solution, then we shed light if we're in a dark place. If I'm in a dark place and I called you up, you'd give me light so I could find my connection one more time. And as Chuck Chamberlain said, he came in this program, he was disconnected from himself, from others, and from God. And then gradually, as he connected with God, he became connected with himself and with others. And every once in a while, I feel disconnected and I need the light from others. So again, I'm grateful for this meeting, Sam. Thank you for carrying it out the way you have and having the people that do share here. I kind of call it my home group Zoom meeting or something. Anyways, love you. Wonderful to see you. Give my love to your husband.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Tom, would you give us a few minutes? Are we done at 7:30? Or
no, you got
minutes?
30.
It goes till 8.
Ah.
It's an hour and a half. Sam is the Bill Moyers of AA.
Yeah, we haven't started that yet.
We hadn't even started that part yet. Yeah. Anyway, Judy, it was fabulous. I mean, really fabulous. And listening to you and listening to Shelley, it brought back so much stuff. And really great stuff. I'm thinking of a couple of things. Lynn Byron, who Mary Thayer got to know her when she first in '94 when she spoke at FOTS, and something she said one time. I don't know if it was at FOTS or where it was, but She said, periodically on a yearly basis, I take my whole life and I take it like a deck of cards and I throw it up in the air, and then they come down however they will. And I let God establish who and what I am and what I'm going to do. And I think maybe she threw an actual deck of cards. I can't remember if that was the case, but anyway, I think about that from time to time. You know, am I willing to completely throw my life up and let God, you know, resort it, you know, any way the cards will fall, and any way God wants me to do it. I remember another thing I was thinking about was Don saying, and this has to do with the chocolate cake story, which I have butchered that story so many times over the years. And first time I heard it was when Gary said it in '93. And then I tried to copy it, and women would always go, you don't bake a chocolate cake for 450 degrees. You've got that completely screwed up, which ruins the story, you know. So someday I'll try to find out what the actual, recipe is. But at any rate, I remember, like, don't worship the finger, worship what it points to, that thing, you know. It's not the letter of the law, it's the spirit of the law, all of those kinds of things. And Don said one time, he said, you know, when we're working with these people, if they don't hit that evangelical stage, we miss something, you know, because I was there, you know, Mary Thayer watched me be there. I didn't know that there was this precious thing, that there was this jewel, there was this way out. There was this system that actually worked, you know, that could take you from where you were to a better place. But then Don said, but if they stay at the evangelical stage, we definitely miss something, you know? And I think that's the trick, you know. It's like, you know, yeah, get into it, you know, do that book, man, get into the mechanics of it, and then let that take you to the spirit of it, you know, and don't get hung up. Over the years, you know, when I first started, I had a cookie cutter way of working the steps with people, and I got it from people in Denver and, you know, and people in LA, and, you know, the whole 9 yards. And it was everybody that I worked with, I did it exactly the same. And I would, you know, you got to do this and cross that T and you know, dot that I. And then later, as it evolved, it was more of the spirit of the thing. And I'd have sponsees say, well, Joe said you did blah, blah, blah with him, and you didn't do that with me. And I'd have to say, you're not Joe. You know what I mean? Don said, God met us where we were at, and it's our job to meet people where they're at, you know? And it's great reminders for me. You know, I love you, Judy. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I think we just open it up now, Judy.
Okay.
So anybody, let's open it up. Everybody, you want to keep rolling? Keep rolling.
No. I was just looking at all your faces and starting to, you know, I could be here for days.
I know. Let's see here. Well, right now, if you're here and you want to share, please raise your hand on if you attended a Zoom reading, you can raise your hand. And if you don't raise your hand, we'll just call on Kat V from Philly. What about that? What's up, Kat? What are you doing over there?
Hey, my name's Kat. I'm a real alcoholic.
Hi, Kat.
Judy, thank you so much for being here tonight and speaking. You know, I don't know where to start. There was so much.
No, it's fire in mine, Kat.
Yeah. So basically, like I wouldn't know any of you that I know, Judy and Tom and Sam and Jeff and Jim, Luce and Joel and Chris and God, Mary, and there's so many people here. Alan, that I see some of you 5 nights a week since March. I've seen you 5 nights a week. I feel like I know a lot of you more intimately than my home group members who didn't start meeting on Zoom right away. And as far as emotional sobriety, like I think either a year or maybe a year and a half into being sober, I just celebrated 3 years back in August. I was showing up to meetings and there was something off, and I talked to my sponsor about it, and she kind of chuckled and she's like, oh, this is emotional sobriety you're dealing with. And I was like, what is that? And she told me Bill W. wrote a letter on it or an essay on it. And I think she told me I could look it up. And I don't even remember if I looked it up. And if I did, I don't know if I took anything away from it. It's just like 20 years ago, you know, being back in AA. I'm sure there were women who approached me with the solution, but I don't remember hearing it. I just don't remember. It wasn't able to penetrate. And I guess my emotional insobriety continued to remain untreated. And I kind of, I just got darker and darker. And then my sponsor was away in Croatia and I had no one to talk to. And that's how my friend Liz and I, who's my sponsee's sister, I just felt vulnerable enough to reach out to her one day and get very honest with where I was, which I didn't know what was going on with me. And we started to develop a deeper relationship. And she helped me get so much closer to God, you know, in ways I didn't know were possible. And it's sort of like we were these spiritual seekers, but it was just the two of us. And we were craving connection to a fellowship of the Spirit that we knew existed, but we didn't know how to connect to it, how or where. And then the world shut down. And then your sponsee, Cleo, was the last speaker we had at my in-person meeting back in March. And I was so resentful because I had to be at the zone meeting, so I missed half of her story. And if I wouldn't have missed half of her story, I wouldn't have been so intent on getting her to come speak at our first Zoom meeting. I wouldn't have needed to. I would have already heard her story. But we had her speak, and then we had Jack speak, and then we had you speak at the firing line, and so many other of you guys here in this meeting that we've connected to, and thank God for all of that. I realized I had been doing 10 and 11 sort of wrong, or sort of just not the way that I'm doing them now. And listening to Tom share at one of the meetings we had him to, I mean, I'd been praying first thing in the morning before bed since August 2017, but not in the way that I do now. And just the simple addition of every night before bed. Sometimes I just forget to do something simple like say, thank you, God. Just something like that now I do every single night. And then wake up in the morning and listen to his wife Juanita, turn 86 to 88 into a morning meditation on YouTube, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful way to start my day. And then staying up late on Thursday nights to be here in this room. I've never felt closer to the spirit of the universe than I do now. When I'm physically disconnected from interacting with people, face to face in the world. I'm able to hear and see and feel God through all of you through a computer screen. I think that's just the most beautiful thing in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much, Kat. If you're willing to share or would like to share, please raise your hand. I love that part in the essay where it says, perhaps it'll be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of a much more real maturity and balance, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. And, a lot of times when you go to meetings, I used to have this sponsor that would, it was really important not to show people that you sponsored and anybody around you that you hit any kind of bottom with any kind of dependence or any kind of ego reemergence or any of that. I mean, the narrative went like I hit a bottom with alcoholism, my life was unmanageable, I worked the steps, and now I'm better. And I've been, floating on a spiritual plane for the last 12 years. And the funny thing is, it's like Harry Tebow says that the recuperative power of the alcoholic ego would be comic if it weren't so tragic than what it does. And the interesting thing is that you have people like Gary who has a gajillion years of sobriety. They'll say, I got so pissed this week. And you have Jeff saying that he was going to hypnotist because he was eating too much sugar. And I was eating I'm 20 years sober and I eat 2 bowls of Wheaties, Frosty Mini Wheats every night. And I'm kind of pissed about that. And I'm trying to tell myself I wouldn't do that, And the funny thing about this, the dog wakes me up. I have a little dog that eats it with me, my wife's dog. So he comes and sits by me on the couch and has a Frosted Mini Wheat and I have a Frosted Mini Wheat. And, the funny thing is that a lot of people, the neat thing about the people in the Fellowship of the Spirit that have kind of really come into this is that you see that there's a real level of honesty and humility with themselves. Like, at some point, the real love comes when I'm doing this, when I'm giving a part of myself to this little halfway house meeting. The meeting before this, on Wednesdays, I go to this halfway house and have this great step study, and it's fire. It's awesome. We're having a great time. We're going through each step in the big book with these guys. And there's a real freedom when you have a love with people that you don't give a shit what other people think about you, you know, at some point. Like you do, but you don't, like, you know, they're not judging you, and they don't give a shit whether you eat too many Wheaties or what happened, you know, and they know you're in the game and you're real and you work steps and you do that. And every you know, there's another part, a thing that you said, Judy, and you said, I love this part that says each one of those dependencies was a more enlightened piece of the road towards the dependence on God. Like, you know, talking about people and then AA and upon this. I mean, it was a healthier dependence, enlightened dependence on the road towards dependence on God. And I really thought that was beautiful. Hey, real quick, you know, we often talk about this, and a lot of times I just like to kind of, you spoke to this already, but I like to get a little Cliff Notes version on it. You know, most of these people have been sober for quite a while. Was there a time in the last 10 years that you really hit a bottom with some stuff and you went back through the steps or went back at this and you had a new experience, probably several times, but is there any time, like, you know, there's a lot of people have gone broke, got a divorce, had any of that kind of stuff and had to go back through the work or go back through and lay down a dependence and come out of it with a whole new experience? I mean, I did it 14 years. I've done it 16 years. I had a lot of those I really enjoyed. I'd like to maybe hear a couple of yours real quick while we still have you.
Excuse me, we're very cloudy here and I'm choking a lot. We've had some fires out in the mountains and there's ash coming down all the time. So forgive me. A couple of things have been big for me. And you know what I've noticed is that it's not big things. It's the small nail in the shoe things that become big things. So one of the things that happened was I sold a house that I dearly loved. We sold a house that we dearly loved. And it was the right thing to do at the right time. And we moved to a townhouse. And I think that probably I was angry with my husband for over a year before I realized how dependent I was upon my happiness being that house. So what I need to say is that the entire time I owned that house, I owned it, it owned me. I was saying to myself, this is part of the delusion. I said to myself, my life is God's life. This house is God's house. My job is God's job. And when I'm supposed to leave those, I will leave them. And I'm going to be really okay with that because I know that. I understand it. You hear that? All of you know what I just said. I knew the answer. Lost my job, had no idea who I was for 2 years. Who am I without a title? Who am I without my place in American society? And I am a. And suddenly I no longer am a. Fill in the blank. And I had no idea how deeply rooted my job was into who I was as a human being. That was number one. And secondly was the house. We moved to a townhouse. It makes all kinds of sense, but it wasn't my house. And I was dependent on the house that I kept insisting I had no dependency on. We'd started intergroup in my front room. We'd started a meeting in our front room. We'd entertained sponsees, groups, and all kinds of AA events. It was an AA house. It was to the studs of that house. It was filled with AA energy. And when we let go of that house and moved to a house that didn't have AA energy, it had a hairdryer in one of the rooms from the 40s. It didn't have AA energy. And I couldn't get my feet on the ground. I couldn't get my bearings. And at each one of these, I really painfully had to walk backwards through how have I one more time placed my dependency on something else that I'm not into. It's selfish, it's self-centered, but knowing that doesn't make it change. calling names to myself into things doesn't make it change. It is selfish, it is self-centered, but mostly it was that some part of me just can't let go of anything and go on to the next thing and feel like I'm whole until I've kind of mourned it and grieved it. And for me, that tends to be a slow process, and I have to invite more God in and a little less Judy at each step of the way. When I do that, I sometimes have to inventory that. I did inventory the house. I did inventory the job several times, and I guarantee you, he's sitting right here. I can't show him, I can't turn my computer, but I have inventoried his butt many times over the years. And our relationship is over 30 years together. And that too evolves just as my delusions of who I am and where I am and how I am and what I think. I believe what I think. And that's really hard for me to turn that around. I got all the words, but it isn't always the process that goes all the way down to my gut in order to change who I am. And that's the only place I can live, is who I am with the God of my understanding. I hope that makes some sense whatsoever to somebody. Thank you.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for that. John H., you have your hand up? John?
I'm unmuted, sorry. Hi, I'm John.
Hey, buddy. Hey, John.
Sorry, I'm in the dark. We're enjoying the last days of summer out here on the back porch. But I've been coming to this meeting for a few weeks now, and you know, FOTS is my gig. And this emotional sobriety is really it's really touching my heart. And I've been thinking about how COVID has really, through this COVID, I've had this major transformation, and it's still happening now, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially. And for so many years in my business, I feel like a marionette. I've been tugged around, and I've lost this and I've lost that. And people have told me I should go bankrupt and I should do that, this and that. And COVID came along and wiped out half my business. And it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I've been making some big steps lately, and I'm finally finding out after 9 years who John Hinman is. And I don't have those outside influences telling me what I should do now and this and that. I've really stepped up my morning and nightly meditation. And things have just been opening up so wide for me that I'm actually finally getting a chance to live my dream. And all of it's due to you people in these rooms, you know, and I've had to make some changes in my program. And I don't know exactly what those are yet right now. I have this wonderful sponsor, but we haven't spoken in about 3 weeks. We had a difference in opinion, and he's also one of my best friends. And a lot of you know who that is. And I don't know what to do next about that. And I've been praying about it and asking for guidance, you know. But I've been still going to meetings and checking out different meetings and hearing different things. I've snuck into some Al-Anon meetings. And my life is just changing so much. And the people I work with, one of them said to me, man, we've never seen you this happy. I mean, 2 years ago, I had phone insurance because I was winging phones all the time, every time I got pissed. And that's gone away. And I have this new sense of freedom. I have room for other people in my life these days. And it's all thanks to you guys. And Judy, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while, and you've seen me since I've come into the rooms here. And I always appreciate your shares. And that's about all I got to say. But I love you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy, we have a request anonymous request that we hear from Lou G. Can you make that happen? Maybe we can move the
You
chair
want
over.
the rebuttal, is that it? Hang on.
What's up, Lou?
Good to see you all. My name's Lou. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm not supposed to be here. I guess I want to thank Chris for his anonymous suggestion that I speak. He's the only one that ever gets me into this kind of stuff. So it's just got to be him. But anyway, I appreciate y'all allowing me. This is a pretty typical evening for me these days, in that I went to have dinner with a friend I was expecting to end the friendship in, and wound up probably more committed to being involved and engaged in his life than I ever would have dreamed. And then I wasn't supposed to come home because I needed a jacket that I forgot to pick up when I went to work. And so I came in and heard the part of my favorite part of Judy's story, where she's trying to murder me. And then I got to hear about this meeting that I've heard about for weeks now, but haven't been able to be in. And by golly, here I am. And I don't know if anybody else has had that kind of year this year, but we're just sort of, this is where 2020 I expect will take me. Tomorrow afternoon I'm meeting a new sponsee that I ran into on a Zoom call that I wasn't supposed to be on. So I just got to believe and hope that God's in charge, because you just can't make this stuff up. So God bless you all. I hope to get back to this meeting sometime. As Judy's already shared, there's just so many of our dear friends from decades in this program, and I just love so many people on this deal. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you. Welcome down the rabbit hole, Lou. And it wasn't Chris, just so you know, it wasn't Chris. Hold on. We have how do we get some recordings? It's complicated. I don't have a sheet. I don't have a web page where we have these. So I put them on the FOTS family Facebook page. And if you email me or private message me, my email is samglenn@comcast.net, 2 N's. I'll shoot you whatever one you want, or just a handful of them. Let's see who we got here. Anybody hand up? Sometimes, Judy, when people hear that kind of heat, man, people just want to think about it, and just kind of sit with it. It's hard to follow that kind of a awesome share. So then you got to just pick on people like Chris S., who's sitting in his chair, and it's been mentioned tonight. What's up, Chris?
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris. I'm an alcoholic.
Chris.
What a meeting. This meeting has some spiritual horsepower. Let me put it that way. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I think Lou thought I set him up because about 5 years ago, living out in Denver, I roped Judy and Lou into doing a big book workshop with me. Oh, come on, it's like 4 times over. And then I moved away about a month into like a 15-month big book workshop. I think he's still upset. But anyway, what I was thinking tonight was a couple of things. One thing that popped to my mind is I think it's a scriptural quote. We must put away childish things. And for some reason, that was really ringing true with me. When I first showed up, not only was I doing things that wouldn't really benefit anybody else, I was buying things that really wouldn't benefit anybody else. And it was a very, very selfish, self-centered way of living. And that's kind of changed over the course of the years. And more of a service ethic, more of a compassion has kind of set in, not out of any sense of virtue. It's just kind of organically happened with participation in AA. What I've noticed though is there's a large percentage of people who I've been fellowshipping with in this area for a long time who, are really emotionally out of balance, and it has a lot to do with, they don't like Zoom and they're not going to meetings, and I've really tried to reach out to a lot of these people because it started to happen to me. I wasn't a big fan of Zoom when this first started, but we need to be connected. We need to be a part of each other's lives. And as I got more involved, funny thing, I felt a little bit better emotionally. But Judy, thank you so much for sharing. Judy, I'm a big Judy fan, and when I heard that you were on here tonight, I made a special effort to send it out and to show up. So thanks a lot.
Hands up. Let's see what we got here. Jim L.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey,
Greetings from Palm Springs. It's beautiful, always beautiful to be among all you beautiful people. You talked about the bubble. That how do I know when my spiritual growth has reached its ceiling? And it's always comes down to me needing to do with less, somehow or other. And my wife just had her second hip replacement of the year 2 weeks ago, and the year before that she broke her back, and so it's been like several years of business not as usual. And it's like, what can I take? One of the things that I say is, everything is a gift that comes my way. I don't necessarily want that gift, but when it comes, it's something that's really important, and I can go back and learn from all of you, and really comes down to faith and trust in the time that I've been here. I've had multiple lives, and I've seen you have multiple lives. So Judy, thanks a lot. I just I need to grow up, and I need supervision, so I come here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So Judy, one of the, some of the things that I like to do is read a little outside literature here and there. The last book I read that really just knocked my socks off was a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. I read that on the airplane. Just reminded me so much, kind of a lot about this, on the way back from Seattle. I was listening to this guy because of the political climate. I was listening to a podcast where one guy from one party was talking to a doctor from that same party, and he said, he was talking about how when a candidate, the media will blow up and say some candidate said this, and he didn't really say that. And he said, how interesting, how tribalistic we can be, and how interesting it is to change your mind when you're in a one tribe. So he said he had a friend who was from another political party, and the guy would often talk about one of these things, and he'd say, oh yeah, well, this is actually what happened. This is actually what he said. You see this evidence? And the guy would go, well, yeah, but what about this, this, and this? And then he would repeat the same story later. He wouldn't change his mind. It's almost like it doesn't matter what you show somebody in front of this, they won't change their mind if you've been conditioned to believe that. And I think the cool thing, and I didn't mean that to say politically, it's just interesting that with the way that we do stuff, there's books that'll just change your mind. I think the cool thing about AA is it really opens you up to being wrong. And one of the great statements that you put is that you don't always have to believe what you think, And there's certain books that have really helped me with that. I know that, I love the Bible. I love The Untethered Soul was a great book. I read that every day I read that book 3 times in a year one time. What are some of the books that you've liked or some stuff that's really helped change you? What's some of the stuff that you've gotten into?
Well, I'm doing a combination of books. Like I said, I read kind of broadly. I'm listening I'm reading some Anthony DeMello, which works for my AA heart because it does small stories that really that make me think, and I'll think about them for a couple of days at a time. And I've got, what's the name of that book in the bathroom? The one that goes, I've got one of those that does a meditation every day. Not the AA book, but it's a spiritual, I'm forgetting his name. I'm reading AA Comes of Age again, and some AA history. I'm reading the history of writing the big book. And I'm reading some, I'm actually following some people who do some spiritual sharing on YouTube as well. One of them being a rabbi from Central Synagogue. And I don't know, Central of what? I have no idea, but she's a lady who just speaks to my heart. And so I listen to her sermons. There's an interesting amount of spiritual seeking that goes on everywhere. And the soul of sponsorship is just, I'm going back, I've started again on that one, which is the story of the little priest that brought, so much goodness into Bill Wilson's depression. And like I said, I read a lot of trash too. I read quickly, and I do a lot of audiobooks, because when I read by audio, I hear all the words. And sometimes when I read word by word, I skip words. I read too quickly to get to the end of the story, and I skip some words in the middle. So it really helps me if I listen, because apparently I'm an audio learner. I suppose that makes me, I don't know what the definition is, but I like to listen in such a way that I hear all the words, but I really like stories, which is why Anthony DeMello has been so powerful in my little current nest of books. I have a bookshelf behind me, and it's got AA on one shelf, it's got Italian on the other shelf. I'm trying to learn some Italian and some Latin at the same time so I can read old records, and it's got fiction on the rest of it. I'm reading a book about World War I, or I'm reading a couple of books about World War I, so that I can follow the understanding of how people thought at the time. And because I'm actually writing a book that with a character that's taking place in World War I. So I stay busy with literature. I like, our AA literature is great. And if anybody's read there's a new one out that I haven't yet gotten, but I think that AA is struggling with its literature. I want to say that if anybody feels the need to order from GSO, they're hurting for literature sales. So I'd like to put in my little plug for that, because I've heard that today on a call, that they're hurting a lot. Having just realized, there's an AA thought for you. For years, everybody talked about, is it really not a good thing for us to be so dependent on AA literature to balance the budget at AA? And we've always looked at it from the point of the view of AA as an organization. Since COVID has changed the way all of that works, it's flipped. And GSO, our offices in New York, are now saying, oh my gosh, this is really unhealthy for us to depend on literature sales. So it's completely flipped the picture to where the people who produce the literature are now finding that that dependency was really unhealthy too. So there's a lot of talk going on about what do we do about that? We have a deficit that's going on, and we have a lot of concern that we're not going to be able to meet our bills. So just carrying what I learned today. Thanks for letting me share. Thanks for asking.
So finally, is there anything that you would like to say that you haven't had a chance to say that you thought about, or?
Oh, there was about a dozen things that I never finished. You don't
Yeah.
have time. It's 8:02. Just
All
fill
right.
in the blanks.
Okay, and then we'll close. We like to close where we go to kind of our inner room and just mute ourselves and close our eyes and inwardly say the Lord's Prayer if you care to. Amen. Thank you, Judy, so much. Thanks, everybody, for coming on tonight. Next week, we have Bill C. From, I think he's from Torrance, California. Is that right? He's in California? Yeah. Finally got him to come on here. So he'll be here. We kind of bullied him around a couple weeks ago, too. So join us for next week. It'll be fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Everyone.